I had not built a well-ordered kingdom by failing to notice things. I noticed when the Eastern granary returns were 2 bushels short on their third accounting. I noticed when my steward, Aldrich, cleared his throat before delivering news he expected me to refuse. I noticed when the candle in my study guttered at the wrong moment, which meant the upper corridor window had been opened, which meant someone was in the east wing who shouldn't be. What I failed to notice, for longer than I have any excuse for, was that my wolf had stopped sleeping in the keep. Drav was not a young wolf. He was large and old and silver-coated at the muzzle, and he had run with me since I was 14, which meant he had run with me through 2 border skirmishes, 1 attempt at my succession, and the long quiet years after, when there was nothing more dramatic to face than the accumulation of competent governance. He did not play. He did not perform loyalty the way pack wolves sometimes did, circling the hall and collecting the admiration of visitors. He found a patch of floor near my chair, and he stayed on it, and that was how it had been for 11 years. Until, apparently, the autumn trading quarter opened below the keep walls. I discovered the absence on a Wednesday evening. Aldrich, who kept meticulous track of things he believed I would want to know, and equally meticulous track of things he believed I would prefer not to worry about, had apparently decided this fell into the second category for 6 consecutive nights before reconsidering. He goes to the lower quarter, Aldrich told me, in the careful tone he used when the information he was delivering was going to require me to choose between several responses, none of them convenient. In the evenings, after the 3rd bell. Drav. Yes. To the trading quarter. The seasonal market, yes. The autumn traders have been there for a fortnight. He returns before dawn. He has not caused any difficulty. I looked at Aldrich. He had the decency not to look away. He has not caused any difficulty, I repeated. None reported. You have let my wolf leave the keep for 6 consecutive nights to visit a market, and you are telling me now. Aldrich's expression did not change, but his left hand moved slightly, which was his equivalent of wincing. I was uncertain it would continue. It seemed possible it was a single occurrence. After 6 nights. I wanted to be certain before troubling you. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I stood, which told Aldrich the conversation was over, and I went to find out what was interesting about the autumn market. The lower trading quarter was not part of my usual circuit. It opened every year from the first frost until the winter gates closed. A dense, warm, amber-lit stretch of stalls and covered walkways below the keep walls that the permanent merchants of Ashenvale tolerated with the particular grudging acceptance reserved for things that were profitable and annoying in equal measure. It smelled of wood smoke and dried apples, and in the evenings of hot wax. That last detail registered as I came down the west gate steps. The candle stall was at the far end of the row, tucked against the river wall where a gate lantern threw the most reliable light after dark. It was a good position, the kind of position a trader who had been doing this long enough to know what mattered would secure early and hold. The stall itself was smaller than most, stocked with practical candles in varying lengths and a smaller selection of something more decorative, and it was currently also occupied by my wolf. Drav was sitting in front of the stall, not beside it, not at a polite remove, directly in front in the space between the stall's edge and the walkway, which meant that anyone approaching from the left had to step around him, and anyone approaching from the right had to notice him first. He was sitting very straight, the way he sometimes sat when he was watching something he found important, and his attention was entirely on the interior of the stall. I stopped at the edge of the walkway. From this angle I could see through the gap between the waxcloth awning and the front board, the trader at work, her back mostly to me, doing something precise with wicks. She was not young and not old and wore a plain work apron over a dark dress, and she was talking to the wolf. Not to me, she didn't know I was there, to the wolf. "You're in the way again," she said, not unkindly, the tone of someone making a factual observation to a party who had heard it before and was not planning to adjust. "You understand that, yes. The Haverson couple couldn't get through. They had to go around." Drav's tail moved once, a single slow arc. "I'm not feeding you, I have said that. I have said it multiple times." She turned to set something on the table behind her, glancing at the wolf as she did. "You have a perfectly good keep up that hill. I've seen it. It's substantial." Another slow arc of the tail. She returned to the wick work. "Stay as long as you like, but I'm working." I stood at the edge of the walkway for longer than was strictly necessary. Then I went back up the hill. Aldrich was waiting in the study with the expression of a man who had correctly predicted that his Alpha King would return from the market with more questions than he had left with. "How long," I said, sitting down, "has he been visiting this particular stall?" "Since the market opened," Aldrich said. 14 nights. You told me 6. I told you he had been absent 6 nights before I reported it. He has been going every night since the market opened. I looked at him. "I was uncertain," he said, "of the significance." I was uncertain of the significance too, which was the more honest version of why I had not gone back down the hill to introduce myself to the candle maker. I had a wolf who had run beside me for 11 years, who had shown no particular interest in any person who was not me, who had now attended the same market stall on 14 consecutive evenings, and was apparently on terms of comfortable address with its proprietor, and I could not account for any of it. Drav knew things I did not. He had always known things I did not. That was part of what it meant to run with a wolf who had been bonded to your bloodline for longer than you had been alive. He tracked moods and intentions that I sometimes only noticed later, when I could put words to what he had already felt in a room. But 14 nights at a candle stall was not a mood. It was something more deliberate than that, and I did not have a category for it. "What do the traders in the quarter say?" I asked. "That the wolf is very well behaved, that he does not bother anyone, that the candle maker seems unbothered by him, which they find either reassuring or strange, depending on who you ask." Aldrich paused. "Several people have visited the stall specifically because they wanted to stand near the wolf without approaching him directly. Her sales have improved." "That is not what I asked." "No," Aldrich agreed. "What you asked is harder to answer." I dismissed him and sat with it for a while. The wolf came home before dawn, as reported. He walked into the study and lay down at the foot of my chair without ceremony, and I looked at the back of his silver-gray head and thought, "You could tell me. If you wanted to tell me, you could simply sit up and look at me the way you do when there's something in the east wing. I would understand." Drav's ear twitched. He did not look up. "I went to bed. I went back to the market on the 5th evening after that. I did not announce myself. I came down the west gate steps at the time I had come before, which was after the 3rd bell and before the traders began packing up for the night, and I came without Aldrich and without the 2 guard who typically walked behind me on inspection circuits. A king who arrives at a market stall flanked by guards is performing something, and I did not know yet what I was doing here, and I did not want to perform it. Drav was already there. Of course he was. He was in his spot in front of the stall, sitting straight, and the candle maker was talking to a customer, an older woman who was examining a row of the practical candles with the expression of someone who had decided what she wanted, but intended to take her time about it. I stood to one side of the walkway and watched. The trader finished the sale with the older woman and turned to restock the front of the display. She moved efficiently and without waste, the kind of movement that comes from having done the same task in the same order enough times that it no longer requires attention. She noticed me on her second pass across the stall. She did not startle. She looked at me, assessed the situation in approximately 3 seconds and said, "The wolf is behaving." "I know," I said. "He's been good about not blocking the full walkway, He moved left on his own when Vass tried to get a cart through. She tilted her head slightly. I assume you're here about him. I'm here to introduce myself. I know who you are, she said. This was delivered without deference or warmth, simply as a fact. You've been standing at the end of the walkway watching on and off for, I think this is the third time. I noticed the second time. I had underestimated her peripheral attention. Soren, I said, because it was accurate and because the full title in this context felt strange. Ren, she said, the candle maker, she nodded at the wolf. He started coming about 2 weeks ago, every night since. I don't mind him, he's quiet. He's not usually sociable. He's not sociable now, she said. He doesn't want anything from me, he just sits. She turned back to her restocking. You can ask him what he's doing, I can't tell you. I looked at Drav. Drav looked at the candle stall. I don't suppose, I said, you know why he comes. No idea, Ren said pleasantly, but he's punctual. I'll give him that. She did not seem to find this remarkable. She did not seem alarmed by the presence of a large old royal wolf sitting in front of her stall for the third consecutive week, and she did not seem particularly moved by the presence of the man that wolf belonged to. She had assessed me in 3 seconds and returned to her work, which was either very confident or very unimpressed, and I could not immediately determine which. You don't find it unusual, I said. I find it unusual, she said, but I've been in markets for 17 years and unusual stops being alarming after a while. Things happen. Wolves sit in front of stalls. The world continues. She glanced at me sideways. Does it bother you that he comes here? It did not bother me, which was itself confusing. No, I said. Then we're agreed, she said. He can stay. You can stand there or not. I'm going to finish restocking. I stayed for another quarter hour. Drav did not move. Ren finished her restocking, attended 2 more customers, and at no point adjusted her manner to account for the fact that the Alpha King of Ashenvale was standing 15 feet away. When I left, I received a small nod of acknowledgement, the same she had given the older woman who had bought the candles. Walking back up the hill, I told myself the wolf was following some instinct I did not understand, and that understanding would come eventually, and that the appropriate response was to observe and wait. I did not examine how many evenings I was willing to observe. The third visit I brought Aldrich, which was a mistake, because Aldrich immediately began doing arithmetic. She is, he said, in the tone of a man who has solved a problem he was not certain he was working on, not affiliated with any pack in the kingdom. Many people are not affiliated with a pack, I said. No wolf claim, Aldrich said as if I had not spoken. No bonded mate, traveling trader registered out of the Veldenmoor South Market Circuit. She's been on the autumn route for 11 years. She stops here every year for the full season. He looked at Drav. Has he done this before, at other markets? Not that has been reported to me. So he does this here with her and not elsewhere, Aldrich paused, with anyone. Yes, I said through slightly closed teeth. That's interesting, Aldrich said. Your duty, I said, does not include finding things interesting. Aldrich made the small sound of a man who disagreed but had decided not to say so. We walked back up the hill in a silence that was, on his side, still subtly interested. By the 6th week of the market season, the wolf had established a routine that I had apparently also established, though I had not meant to. He left the keep at 3rd bell. He attended the stall. He sat in front of it until Ren packed up for the night, which she did methodically, the same order every time, closing the waxcloth awning from left to right, and then he walked back up the hill with me if I was there or alone if I was not. I was there most nights. I told myself this was because I was still trying to understand what the wolf was doing. This was not true, and I was aware that it was not true, and I continued to tell it to myself anyway, because the alternative required me to think about what it actually meant that I looked forward to the third bell in a way that had nothing to do with Drav. Wren had begun talking to me the way she talked to the wolf. This was not an insult. She talked to the wolf the way she talked to her long-term customers, practically, without preamble, as if the connection were already established and needed no ceremony. She would say, "The Haverson couple has started using you as a landmark. They tell people to turn left at the wolf," she would say. "There was a child here today who asked me if you eat candles. I said I didn't think so." She would say, "You've been standing there longer than usual tonight. Did something happen in the keep?" The last one was directed at me. I answered honestly, which was unusual. Something had happened in the keep, a council dispute over the mill rights on the eastern border, the third in 6 months, and I had been in a room with 5 men who were all correct and also all wrong, and none of them had noticed. And I said so briefly, and she listened the way she did everything, without unnecessary reaction, with complete attention. "That sounds tiring," she said, "being the only person who sees it both ways." "It is sometimes." "Do they know you see it both ways?" "They know I make a decision," I said. "The process is mine." She nodded, returning to whatever she was doing with the evening's inventory. "My father used to say that the loneliest work is the kind that looks easy from the outside." She said it without self-pity, the way she said most things, as a factual observation about the nature of things, offered freely and not requiring response. I thought about it for the rest of the evening and for some time after. On the 41st night of the market season, which I had not been counting, and which Aldrich had been counting, and which he had not told me because he was trying not to be interesting about it, Wren said, "Why does your wolf keep coming to my window?" She said it on a Wednesday, which was the slow night, when the other traders were quieter, and the foot traffic in the lower quarter thinned to the people who came for a specific errand rather than to browse. She said it the way she said most things, plainly and without particular emphasis, while she was checking the alignment of her front display. I did not answer immediately, because I did not have an answer, and I had learned that she preferred an honest silence to a convenient response. "I don't know," I said finally. She looked at me then, not the sideways glance she used when she was assessing something at the edge of her attention, straight on, the way she looked at things she had decided to examine properly. "You've been coming here for 6 weeks, she said. "Yes. Because of him." I looked at Drav. He was sitting in his spot, not looking at me, with the expression of a wolf who was not participating in this conversation, and never had been, and had no idea what we were talking about. "Initially," I said. The word landed in the space between us. Wren heard it. She was very good at hearing the part of a sentence that carried weight. "Initially," she repeated, in the tone of someone reading it back to check the meaning. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Around us the market continued, the low sound of the other traders, a burst of laughter from somewhere to the left, the smell of wood smoke and cooling wax. Drav's tail moved once very slowly, the same arc it always made, and he did not look at either of us. "I don't have an answer either," Wren said. "For why he comes, I've tried to work it out. He started the first night the market opened. He hasn't missed an evening. He doesn't want anything from me, he won't take food, he doesn't want to be petted, he just sits there." She paused. "I thought at first it was a territory thing. Then I thought maybe he was sick and this was where he felt safe. Then I stopped trying to explain it and let him sit." "That's what I did," I said. "And now you're here too," she said. "Yes." Another pause. She had turned back to the display, arranging things that did not need arranging, and I recognized this as what she did when she was thinking through something she was not certain how to say. "I'm not from here," she said. "I'm not Pat claimed. I don't have a wolf. I'm a candle maker who is in Ashenvale for 3 months out of 12, and then I go south to the winter markets, and then I come back the following autumn." She glanced at me. "That's the truth of my situation. in case it was relevant. It's relevant, I said. She looked at me again, the full straight look. To what? She said. And I found that I did not have an answer to that either, which was the second time in 10 minutes that I had found myself without one, which was not a situation I encountered often, and had never before this autumn encountered about a person. Drav shifted. Not much, just enough to settle his weight differently. The way he settled when he had decided the place he was in was the place he intended to stay. The market continued around us. I don't know, I said for the second time, what I'm trying to say. I know, Ren said. You're not usually like that. No. She turned back to her work. Come back tomorrow if you want. The wolf will be here. I imagine you will be too. She said it without an invitation in it and without a dismissal in it. Simply a fact, delivered the same way she delivered everything, as if the thing were already settled and had only been waiting for someone to say it. I walked back up the hill that night with Drav at my left side, and I thought, you could have told me, 6 weeks ago. You could have simply sat up and looked at me the way you do when there's something important, and I would have listened. Drav walked beside me in the dark, unhurried, and said nothing. Part 2:4, 250 words. The following night she asked me about the mill dispute. This was not something I had mentioned in detail. I had said, one evening 3 weeks prior, that there had been a council disagreement about mill rights, and she had said that sounds tiring, and I had thought about her father's observation for 3 days afterward. I had not brought it up again. She had remembered. Did you resolve the mill thing? She said when I arrived. She was doing something with a batch of cooling wax, working it toward the right consistency without looking up. 2 weeks ago. How? I told her. The mill rights dispute had involved 2 families who had been sharing a waterway for 40 years and had managed it well until a dry summer reduced the flow and turned shared inconvenience into genuine competition. The council had arrived at the meeting with 2 positions and the expectation that I would choose one. I had chosen neither and proposed a rotation schedule that reduced both families' individual claim, but guaranteed them both a reliable share, which had satisfied nobody initially and had, by the following week, been accepted by everyone as obviously correct. The second family, Ren said, still working the wax, was the one who would lose more in a bad year under the old arrangement. Yes. And they agreed first. Yes. Because they knew it was fairer, even though they'd have to fight for the rotation schedule every time the first family forgot. She glanced up. The first family will try to claim more than their share in the 3rd year. You should write the rotation into the district record so they can't. I looked at her. Or you've already done that, she said. You probably have. I had Aldrich record it that afternoon, I said. She nodded, returning to the wax. Good. This was, I thought, one of the more peculiar conversations I had had in recent memory, not because it was strange in content, but because it was entirely normal in the way that very few conversations I had were normal. The people I talked to in the keep talked to me carefully, with awareness of what I was and what I could decide. Ren talked to me the way she talked to the wolf, directly, without performance, as if the connection were already established and needed no management. You've thought about these things, I said. I've been in markets for 17 years, she said. Markets are all about who controls the resource and who shares it and who cheats and how you catch them. Different scale, same problem. She looked up again. You're staring. I know. Is something wrong? No, I said, nothing is wrong. She held my gaze for a moment, the same straight look she used when she was deciding what something meant. Then she returned to the wax, and the market continued around us, and Drav sat in his spot with his tail making its slow arc across the cobblestones, and I stood 15 feet from a candle maker's stall trying to identify what was happening to my understanding of my own situation. It was this. I had run a well-ordered kingdom for 11 years. I had made decisions that were sound and just, and when necessary, hard. I had done this without a fated mate and without the expectation of one, because I had understood, somewhere in the middle of my 3rd year of governance, that a king could be complete without that particular completion, that the kingdom was enough, and the wolf was enough, and the work was enough, and that the ache for something else that sometimes arrived on quiet evenings was a feeling and not a truth. That understanding was currently not holding up very well. Drav's tale completed its arc. He settled more deeply into his spot. He had the air of a very patient wolf who had been waiting for several weeks for a particular situation to resolve itself, and was prepared to continue waiting as long as necessary. On the night I finally asked Aldrich what he thought, he was quiet for long enough that I began to wish I hadn't asked. "I think," he said carefully, "that Drav knows something. That is not new information. I think he has known it for some time, and he decided, as wolves do, that the most useful thing was to be in the presence of the thing he knew, and to remain there until the situation clarified." I said nothing. "I also think," Aldrich said more carefully still, "that you have been in the presence of the thing for 6 weeks, and the situation has clarified somewhat, and you are now deciding what to do about it." "You are being interesting again," I said. "You asked me," Aldrich said, with the dignity of a man who has earned the right to say so. He was correct on every count, which was the irritating thing about Aldrich. He was correct that Drav knew something. He was correct that the wolf had been there as a fact, present and patient, and that the situation had been slowly clarifying since the first evening I came down the Westgate steps and found Drav sitting in front of a candle stall like a very large, very old, very deliberate statement about where he believed something important was located. And he was correct that I had been deciding. The difficulty was that what I was deciding was not weather. I had known the answer to weather for at least 3 weeks, though I had been very careful not to say so to myself in those exact words. The difficulty was the shape of the thing, the size of it, and the fact that Wren was from somewhere else, and came for 3 months and then went south, and had no pack claim and no wolf of her own, and had built a life that was entirely mobile, and I did not know what that life had room for, or whether it had room for anything new, or whether I was about to say something to her that she would receive the way she received most things, plainly, practically, with the directness of someone who had decided what was true and had no interest in pretending otherwise. I went back to the market the following evening. The market season ran until the first hard frost. We were, by my calculation and by the general consensus of the Ashenvale weather, which had opinions and was not shy about expressing them, perhaps 3 weeks from that frost. The traders would begin packing up on a rolling basis as the temperature dropped, and the seasonal quarter would empty from the edges inward, and Wren would eventually pack her stall, settle her accounts with the market registry, and head south for the winter circuit. I had not said anything about this. She had not said anything about this. Drav sat in his spot every night and made no acknowledgement that the season was ending, which was either very restful or very unhelpful, depending on how one looked at it. On a Tuesday evening, 9 days before the first frost was predicted, she said, "You've been standing closer than usual." She said it without looking up from the evening's count, matter-of-factly. "Yes," I said. "Is that intentional?" "Yes." She finished the count, set down the ledger, looked at me. "The market closes in about 10 days, she said. "I know. And then I go south." "I know that too." She was quiet. Around us the market was beginning its evening wind down, the sound of stalls being covered, traders calling good night to each other, the smell of the river gate coming up as the wind shifted. Drav had not moved. He sat between us like a very solid, very certain fact, and his tail moved once in its slow arc. "I've been in markets for 17 years, Wren said, "and I have never had a wolf sit outside my stall for 2 months." No, I said. He hasn't done this before with anyone. I thought as much. She looked at Drav. Do you know what he knows? I think so, I said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Say it then. And I did. I said it plainly, the way she said things, without preamble and without performance, the way she had taught me, over 6 weeks of standing at the edge of a candle stall, was how the most important things ought to be said. I said, I think my wolf knew before I did. I think he has been sitting here because he recognized something I was not ready to name. And I think the name is that you are my fated mate, and I know what that means for you and for your life and for what you have built, and I am not asking you to give any of it up. I am telling you what is true because you asked me to say it. The market went on around us. A trader called good night from 3 stalls over. The river gate groaned as the wind came off the water. Wren looked at Drav for a long moment. The wolf looked back at her. He's been sitting here for 2 months, she said. 47 days, I said, and then realized I had in fact been counting. The corner of her mouth moved. You've been counting. Apparently. She was quiet again. Then she said, I haven't been anywhere longer than 3 months in 17 years. I know. I don't know what to do with that, with being in one place. I don't know what to do with any of this either, I said. That has been the situation for 47 days. She looked at me. The full, straight look, the one she used for things she was examining properly. I'm not going to decide tonight, she said. I'm not asking you to. But I'm not saying no, she said. That's also true. I want to be clear about that. I understand. She nodded, turned back to the stall. Come tomorrow, she said, and the day after. We have 10 days. I walked back up the hill that night with Drav at my left side, and I did not tell him that he could have simply looked at me 6 weeks ago, and I would have understood. He knew this. He had simply decided I needed to find my way to it in my own time, which was very like him, patient and certain, and never in a hurry about the things that were already settled. She stayed for the extra days. Not because of me, she was clear about this, in the way she was clear about everything. The weather had turned unexpectedly mild, which pushed the first hard frost back by 10 days, and the good weather extended the market's viable season, and she was a trader who was practical about extending a good season when the opportunity was there. These were the facts. She told me so on the 3rd evening of the extended season, when I arrived to find her restocking the front display with a new batch that she had clearly stayed up the previous night to make. It's not for you, she said, when she saw me looking at the new stock. I know. The weather is good and the market is still strong. It would be foolish to leave. It would, I said. I'm not staying because of you. I understand. She gave me the sideways look that meant she was checking whether I actually understood or was simply agreeing. Then she appeared to decide I understood and returned to the restocking. The thing was, I did understand. This was one of the things I had come to understand over 47 days and then 10 more about Wren. That she would not do something because it was expected of her, and she would not do something because it would be easier to do it than to explain why she wasn't, and she would not dress a decision in a reason it didn't have. If she was staying for the extended market season, it was because the market season was worth extending. If she was also, separately, deciding something else, she would say so when she had decided it and not before. I respected this in a way that was difficult to articulate clearly. I had spent 11 years in a room with people who managed what they said very carefully, and I had become good at hearing the gap between the statement and the truth. Wren had no gap. What she said and what was true were the same thing, and the things she hadn't said yet were not hidden. They were simply not ready yet, and she would say them when they were. So I came to the market, and the wolf sat in his spot, and the extended season continued. On the 6th day of the extension, the weather shifted. Not the killing frost that came later, and we all knew it when it arrived. This was the other kind of shift, the one that comes before, a drop in temperature in the evenings, a quality to the air that made the candle flames in the stalls burn very steadily, very cleanly, with no wavering at all. The traders who had been here as long as the market had recognized it and began making their calculations. 2 weeks, perhaps 3, and then the real cold. I arrived at the third bell to find Drav already in his spot, and Wren doing something I had not seen before. She was making something for herself, not for sale. A single candle tall, in a shade of amber that was darker than her usual stock, working it with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. She didn't explain. I didn't ask. But when she was done, she set it in the center of the front display, where it caught the gate lantern's light, and it was the brightest thing on the table. "What's that one for?" I asked eventually. "I don't know yet," she said. "Sometimes I make one and find out later." I thought about that for the rest of the evening. "On the 9th day of the extension," she said, "tell me what it would look like if I stayed." She said it while she was packing up for the night, covering the awning from left to right in the way she always did, and she said it the way she said important things, without preamble, without particular emphasis, as if it were a practical question, which it was. "Tell me what it would mean for the stall," she said, "concretely. I'm not asking about the rest of it, I'm asking about this." She gestured at the stall. I thought about it properly. "There's a permanent market quarter," I said, "open year-round. The traders with fixed positions pay a seasonal rate. A stall of this size would run, I would have to check with the market registry. I don't know the rate." "I'm not asking you to cover the rate," she said. "I'm asking if the market is good enough to warrant it." "The winter market is smaller," I said. "The spring market is larger. The autumn market is the best season. Over the year, yes, it's a good market." "Would I lose the South Circuit entirely if I took a fixed position?" "Other traders manage both. I don't know the specifics of your arrangement." She nodded. "I would have to renegotiate with the South Circuit. I've been doing those markets for 8 years. They'd prefer I stay." She paused. "But they'd manage without me." I said nothing, because this was not my decision and she was not asking me to make it. "The other part," she said after a moment. "Yes. What does that look like, concretely?" I thought about how to say it plainly, the way she said things. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are," I said. "I'm not asking you to stop the stall or the work or the market. I'm not asking you to move into the keep immediately or on any particular schedule. I'm asking you to be here, in Ashenvale, long enough that we can find out what this is, with time rather than with 10 days. She was quiet. "The wolf," she said. "Yes." "He knew." "He always knows first," I said. "That has been the arrangement for 11 years. The corner of her mouth moved again, the small motion I had come to look for, the one that meant she found something genuinely funny rather than merely adequate. "He sat outside my stall for 2 months, she said. "That's a strong endorsement." "He doesn't give endorsements lightly." "No," she said. "I imagine he doesn't." She looked at Drav. The wolf looked back at her with the calm attention of a wolf who had been waiting for this particular conversation for 49 days and found the pace entirely acceptable. "I want to write to the South Circuit before I decide," she said. "They should hear it from me, not from a market registry notification." "Of course. And I want to see the rate for a fixed position. I'm not asking you to cover it. I want to see if it's viable on its own terms. I'll have Aldrich send you the rate schedule tomorrow." She nodded, "And the rest of it, the other part, I need a little more time." "Take whatever you need," I said. She finished covering the awning. The market had gone quiet around us. The other stalls settled for the night, the gate lantern throwing its steady amber light across the front of the display. The amber candle she had made 3 days ago burned in the center of the table, very straight, with no wavering at all. "Come back tomorrow," she said. I will. She wrote to the South Circuit on the 10th day. I knew this because Aldrich knew this, and Aldrich told me in the tone of a man who was not going to make a point of it, but was also not going to leave it unmentioned. She had gone to the market registry herself for the rate schedule, had not waited for the information from Aldrich, had simply walked in and asked for it, which had occasioned some surprise and a great deal of very careful behavior from the registry clerk, who had apparently not expected the Alpha King's interest in the stall to extend to the stall's proprietor having an independent inquiry. She paid for a full consultation, Aldrich told me. She wanted to know the contract terms, the renewal structure, and the provisions for temporary absence. Temporary absence, I repeated. She asked specifically about the South Circuit schedule, whether a fixed position holder could maintain a secondary market presence elsewhere in the winter season. He paused. The answer is yes, under certain conditions. I sat with that for a while. She was not giving up the South Circuit. She was asking whether she could keep it. She was asking whether the fixed position in Ashenvale was compatible with the life she had built, not whether the life she had built could be set aside. This was very much like her, and I had no wish for it to be otherwise. The first frost came on a Tuesday. Not the killing frost, just the first one, the frost that coats the cobblestone silver by morning and burns off by midday, the one that means, pay attention, it's coming. The market had been preparing for it, and the morning of the first frost saw several of the peripheral stalls completing their pack-up and departing, their spaces leaving gaps in the row like missing teeth. Wren's stall was not among them. I came down the west gate steps at third bell and found her at the stall as she always was, with Drav in his spot and the gate lantern doing its work, and the amber candle on the front display. She had lit a new one, slightly smaller than the first. I heard from the South Circuit, she said, when I was close enough. Yes. They're disappointed, she said, but they've accepted it, provisionally. I told them I may rejoin the winter rotation in 2 years if, depending on how things develop. She glanced at me. I'm not burning anything down. I'm adjusting the route. That seems right, I said. I'm taking the fixed position, she said. I spoke to the registry, I've signed the paperwork. She paused. For a year initially, with the option to renew. A year, I said. A year, she said. We'll see what we know at the end of it. This was, I understood, her version of yes. Not a ceremony, not a declaration. A year and a provisional arrangement, and the South Circuit held open, and a woman who had been in markets for 17 years was not about to commit to anything she hadn't tested first. It was entirely consistent with everything I had come to know about her, and it was, I found, exactly right. I'll have the keep apartment prepared, I said. You don't have to use it. But it's there. The stall is enough for now, she said. I'll see the apartment when I'm ready. Of course. She turned back to the display. After a moment she said, he hasn't moved. She meant Drav. The wolf was in his spot, exactly where he always was, with his tail making its slow arc. He had not moved during the conversation, had not marked the moment with any particular shift in attention or behavior. He looked from the outside exactly as he always looked, patient, certain, already in possession of information the people around him were only now arriving at. No, I said, he doesn't need to. She looked at the wolf for a moment. Then she said, almost to herself, 49 days. 49 days, I confirmed. That's a long time to wait. He's patient, I said. He always has been. She looked at Drav, and Drav looked back at her, and something passed between them that I was not entirely part of, the particular understanding of two parties who had been in this situation longer than I had, and who had both been waiting, in their different ways, for the same resolution. Then she returned to the evening's work, and I stood where I stood, and the market, smaller now, with its gaps and its missing stalls, went on around us. The stall ran until the week before the killing frost. She packed it up herself, the way she did everything, methodically in the same order without making more of it than it was. The last thing she packed was the amber candle, the second one, the smaller one. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it in the case with the rest of the inventory she was taking to winter storage. And then she stood for a moment looking at the empty table, and I stood beside her, and Drav sat between us. 58 days, she said. I had counted, of course I had counted. From the first night he came, she said, to the last night of the season. Yes. She looked at the empty stall, the bare table, the waxcloth awning she had covered for the last time this season. Then she looked at me. The apartment, she said, you said it was there. It's there. I'd like to see it, she said. We walked back up the hill, the three of us, Ren and I and Drav between us, up the west gate steps and through the lower ward and into the keep. Aldrich was waiting in the corridor with the particular expression of a man who had correctly predicted a great many things and was being very restrained about it. I showed her the apartment. It was on the east side of the keep, with a window that caught the morning light and a room on the lower floor that could be fitted for a workroom if she wanted one, and a view of the market quarter below the walls, the empty stalls, the bare cobblestones, the gate lantern that would burn all winter regardless. She stood at the window for a while. The market is down there, she said. Yes. I can see it from here. You can. She turned from the window. Drav had come into the room without ceremony and settled in the corner by the east wall, which was where the morning light would fall when it came. He's already chosen his spot, she said. He does that, I said. He always knows where he's going to be. She looked at the wolf in his corner and at the window and at the room. Then she looked at me. A year, she said. A year, I said. She nodded once, the same nod she had given the older woman who bought the practical candles on the first night I stood at the edge of the walkway, complete, settled, requiring no further elaboration. The keep was quiet around us. Below the window the market quarter was dark and still, all its stalls shut for the winter. The gate lantern burned at the river end of the row, alone, throwing its amber light across the empty cobblestones. I had not built a well-ordered kingdom by failing to notice things. What I had failed to notice for 11 years was that a well-ordered kingdom is not the same as a complete one. Drav had known this. He had been patient about it, in the way of wolves, certain, and in no hurry, and entirely prepared to sit outside a candle stall for 49 evenings until the situation resolved itself. She made her first candle in the keep workroom 3 days later. I know because I could smell the warm wax from the corridor, and I stood outside the door for a moment before deciding there was no reason to stand in corridors when the door was open, and went in. She did not look up from the work. There's a chair, she said. I sat in it. Drav was in his corner. The morning light was coming through the east window exactly as it would. I stayed.